All right, so it looks like we're coming up on the hour at the 5 o'clock. So I'd like to welcome REYES participants to this guest lecture on racial discrimination in imaging technologies by Dr. Dylan Whitcore. So let me just talk a little bit about Dr. Whitcore. He is an associate professor and chair of philosophy and religious studies here at Old Dominion University. He teaches the philosophy of technology, information ethics, and engineering ethics. And his research is based in feminist ethics and intersectional analysis of user experience and addressing issues of race, gender, disability, and religious diversity as well. So with that, and without further ado, Dr. Whitcore.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me? Just looking for, I got a yes and okay.
We can hear you.
Yes, thank you. Great, thanks so much. I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to talking with you about race issues in design and engineering. This is work that I've been doing research on this for a couple of years, and there's lots of other people doing research on this too. I have references that are through the slides here, which I think will be made available to you later, so you can look some of those up. I have a couple of books in particular at the end that I'll recommend for further reading. Noble's Algorithms of Oppression and Benjamin's Race After Technology. Then I have like screenshots and Amazon links up there. So we'll get there. And yeah, and I've got my website up here if you want to look up any more of my stuff. So, okay. This is the way that we're going to go through things today. I'm going to start by saying a few things about how racism isn't just a set of thoughts or beliefs, but gets built into our technologies and our environment. After that, I'll share a bit about the history of racism and imaging technologies in particular, and then we'll look at some current examples of race issues in current digital imaging technologies. And then if we have time, I'll say a few things about anti-racist engineering practices. So, okay, we're actually going to start with this video. So I'm immediately going to break us out of PowerPoint already and over this thing. So I'm going to play about 2/3 of this, and this gives us a good concrete example of the kind of concern we might have.
This is using a video tracking software.
All right.
Explain.
My coworker Wanda and I are sitting in front of an HP Media Smart computer. State-of-the-art computer, wouldn't you say?
I'd say.
We're using the face tracking software, so it's supposed to follow me as I move. I'm black. I think my blackness is interfering with the computer's ability to follow me. As you can see, I do this, no following. Not really following me. I back up, I get really, really close to try to let the camera recognize me, not happening. Now, my white coworker, Wanda, is about to slide into frame. You will immediately see what I'm talking about. Wanda, if you would, please.
Sure.
Now, as you can see, the camera is panning to show Wanda's face. It's following her around. But as soon as my blackness enters the frame, which I will sneak into the frame. I'm sneaking in. I'm in there.
That's it. It's
and
over.
There we go. It stopped. My hands are here. Wanda, please get back in the frame. Get back in. As soon as white Wanda appears, the camera moves. Black Desi gets in there. Oh, nope. No face recognition anymore, buddy. I'm going on record, and I'm saying it. Hewlett-Packard computers are racist. I said it.
So there's more of that, but that's the that's the most important part and the really fun part. So okay, now HP replied to. I mean, this video was posted in 2009, got a huge amount of traffic. HP replied to this in a blog post that they have since taken down. But using the Internet Archive, I went and found it, and this is how they replied to it. They said, The technology we use is built on a standard algorithm or on standard algorithms that measure the difference in intensity of contrast between the eyes and upper cheek and nose. We believe that the camera might have difficulty seeing contrast in conditions where there's insufficient foreground lighting. Now, of course, this response doesn't mention race or skin color, not just in this quote. The whole response does not mention any of that. Just talks about lighting conditions, despite that, like, the lighting was the same for these two users. So this shows a common background assumption that there's like the standard algorithm, right? That's what they say. This is a standard algorithm, as if that is exculpatory, as if that means that there's no way there could be a problem with it. This shows a common background assumption that engineering and technology cannot possibly have racialized or discriminatory impacts because they're objective or because they're based on math. And so therefore, they can't possibly have a discriminatory impact. This background assumption is clearly wrong as soon as we pay attention to how race shows up in engineering practices. For example, in this case, the engineers didn't design the algorithm to exclude people of color, but they used an algorithm which is defined by implication, the algorithm defines by implication what a face is, what counts as a face in a racist way, by saying through the algorithm that a face can be differentiated from non-face objects by looking for contrast patterns that are not present in dark-skinned persons. The engineers have defined persons as light-skinned, and therefore have defined algorithmically dark-skinned people as objects. This shows how racist attitudes and unconscious racial bias make their way into our built environment, and why it's important to understand that racism isn't a set of beliefs or feelings. That's more, bigotry, but racism can be systemic. If we think that only people can be racist and systems and objects can't be, then fixing racism just requires getting white people to be nice. But the reality is that racial inequalities are built into our political and economic systems through things like voter disenfranchisement, through generational poverty, through redlining, through over-policing of minorities, through differential treatment in our incarceration rates and sentencing guidelines, and so on. So bias and exclusion can be built into technology. And it may be less obvious with race than in some instances of disability, like staircases where you can see the exclusion happening, but the built environment is part of systemic racism. In addition to our general reluctance to say that systems and objects can be racist, we seem to be particularly reluctant to say that digital technology can be biased or racist. This faith in the objectivity and therefore the innocence of science, engineering, and mathematics is part of our techno-utopian, techno-optimist view of digital technology, where we think that digital tech will free us and will fix social problems. People today tend to think and sometimes actually say things like, math is objective, math can't be racist. And then, companies train neural networks to screen job applicants and are somehow surprised when the neural networks accurately learn to replicate the sexist and racist hiring patterns of the past. Or they'll put a social bot on Twitter and train it to learn from others, and then somehow don't anticipate that that social bot is going to learn to be racist. So this view of objectivity that we have about science and technology in general, but especially about digital technology, it falls apart really quickly if we know much about the history of technology. So I'll go through a few things here on the history of technology, and then we'll get to imaging technology in particular. So this is a classic example. This is the work of the famous New York City urban planner Robert Moses, who allegedly ordered bridges, including this one in particular, to be built low in order to prevent public transportation routes to be set up that would run to Jones Beach, which is an area that he wanted to make sure would be less available to poorer Black and Puerto Rican residents, who he specifically wanted to exclude because he was more a classist than a racist, but he was definitely, those get mixed together. So the most systemic examples we find in eugenics. So In the early 20th century, there were American eugenicists who used scientific and social engineering arguments to implement the forced sterilization of Black Americans. And IBM, in particular, was employed. This is one of their punch cards. They were employed by the Nazi German government, the Third Reich, to provide logistical support to assist in the efficient, in this case, management of the marriage and breeding of SS officers. But also they produced punch cards that were specifically there to code and efficiently incarcerate and kill Jews and homosexuals and disabled people and political prisoners and so on. Examples from imaging technologies in particular are less dramatic than the IBM example, at least. But they're not hard to find. So Kodak, for example, didn't calibrate its film for darker skin tones until the mid-1990s. Now, I want to emphasize, Kodak has been around for a long, long time, and really, like, about 25 years ago is when things really start to change. And this wasn't because of ignorance or technological underdevelopment. And we see that because, like, for example, this is the famed cinematographer Jean-Luc Godard, who in an interview in 1979 specifically said that he refused to use Kodak film, which he described as racist. He said Kodak film is racist. The way film was developed and printed was also racist. So photo printing equipment is like the big machines in the back of the Walgreens. That equipment is calibrated using printed cards like this one called Shirley cards. And this is an earlier one, but they all kind of look like this. There's usually a woman, there's some color blocks. Until the 90s, the standard Shirley card depicted a white woman. And photo labs used a white woman's face to calibrate their equipment so that you'd be printing white people's faces with good clarity and contrast, in particular. And that led to generations of poor photographic representations of dark-skinned persons, where black faces and bodies sometimes appeared as shadows or blots with few distinguishing features other than white teeth and eyes. Not just in media representations like this one, but in family snapshots. This is the way that film was made. That was what was commercially available to Black people to photograph themselves. So Kodak was called out as particularly racist, but this was an industry-wide issue. So Polaroid, for example, they produce the cameras, they print out the photograph and you wave it around and it develops in the normal sunlight. Polaroid was hired by the apartheid South African government to produce ID cards, which you see here. And they calculated that they would need a 42% increase in lumens, which they produced a very specific flashbulb that would produce just the right amount of light in order to accurately photograph Black South Africans with enough detail that you'd produce a photograph that could be used as an ID card. Without that, Black South Africans looked too much the same. The photographic equipment, the standard off-the-shelf photographic equipment, was so bad at photographing Black people that it could not be used to produce IDs without this 42% lumens increase aftermarket modification for the apartheid government. This really, like I said, only begins to change in the 1990s. That's when Kodak Gold Max was released in 1995. And that was referred to as being able to photograph the details of a dark horse in low light. Because Kodak didn't want to say like, yeah, we finally made something that photographs Black people. Instead, they sort of framed this in commercial interest. They're like, well, you could use this for when you need to photograph something in low light. It's also at that time when the first multiracial Shirley cards were produced. And here's one that's got that good 1990s vintage feel to it. Now, today, with digital photography and ubiquitous camera phones and digital image filters, people of color are now able to produce photographs that represent how they see themselves with real control and with agency. So, we can do all this stuff ourselves. which makes a huge difference. But still, there are plenty of recent examples, much like the racist webcam that we started out with. There are plenty of recent examples that show how imaging technologies can continue to create racial bias when engineers don't design in a race-conscious and anti-racist way. I'll say more about that later, but what I mean by that is just to say, like, if you're not thinking about how people are different in terms of race, you're not going to catch stuff like this. You need to be thinking about race in order to not replicate racially discriminatory engineering practices or replicate racially discriminatory social elements within engineering practices. So, okay, here are some examples that are contemporary examples. One thing that I hear from my students over and over is that they've worked places, I think Kroger was called out a couple of times, where they had to clock in using a fingerprint recognition scanner like this when they came to work. And they said, I've had several students say this over a few years, that they worked someplace that did this and it never worked with Black people. It would clock in just fine for light-skinned people, but for dark-skinned users, it never worked. And of course, we know from iPhones, like it's perfectly possible. It's not a technical problem. It's just that somehow when they developed these for like Kroger, like, you know, not a small company, not like a neighborhood store, they didn't test this properly, or if they did, they said, well, you know, I guess it won't work for everyone, instead of saying like, oh, wow, this is a major problem, that it doesn't work, and that the way that it doesn't work falls down along racial lines. I've also heard from friends of mine that they have problems with automatic water faucets or the automatic soap dispensers, that, you know, they're dark skin and it just won't work for them. Example from a few years ago, Google rolled out a automatic image tagging system, and it tagged some Black people as gorillas, which is of course hugely offensive, and they took it down right away. But yeah, I mean, if in the abstract you think like, okay, we're developing an automated image tagging thing, you should probably think like, well, okay, what could go wrong? And a thing that could pretty clearly go wrong is that it could say terrible, offensive things about people. And so like they didn't test that adequately, obviously, but also this probably happened to begin with because they must have had a data set that was not really representative of the diversity of what humans look like. So you don't put enough Black people in your data set, and of course your neural network is not going to be very good at recognizing Black people. Another example, this is from a little bit longer ago, about 10 years ago. Nikon produced a camera that was supposed to be like a red eye warning, or a blink warning. Sorry, it did both of those, but the blink warning, it would analyze people's faces in the photos and then tell you like, hey, try this one again. It looks like somebody blinked in this photo. But it would say that repeatedly for Asian people, because apparently the way the algorithm was written was based on a white Euro-American eye-shaped norm. And so people whose faces naturally deviated from that norm were flagged as like, oh, maybe you're squinting. Like, oh, somebody blinked. Which is, again, it's troubling both in the way that it cuts out a large user population and the way that it cuts out that user population based on along racial lines, but also because it does so in such a like directly offensive way, as in the previous example, where it's automatically speaking the words that bigots speak about this group, you know, like making fun of somebody's eye shape. So again, this is the thing you would think you'd want to test. You would think it would occur to you to test, and that broke down somewhere along the way. There are a lot of companies that are working on facial recognition software for lots of different applications. a lot of them have developed ethnicity analysis algorithms. And this happens over and over again. I included this example from NTAC Lab, which is a Russian company. I included it because their demo image, like, it's obviously just fake. Like, that's not actual a screenshot from any algorithm at all. But their screenshot, it captures what's really like weird and uncomfortable about this in a really naive way. So I thought it sort of fit the clean corporate view of, we're going to develop this thing. And then of course, like, once you start thinking about what this is going to be used for and how it's going to impact people's lives, it's really, really troubling. So facial recognition companies keep developing these, and then they keep shutting down, or at least they keep, once they get called out, they stop being public about what they're doing. There are some exceptions. So Kairos is a face recognition company, and they were approached by Axion, which is a company that makes police body cams. And Axion wanted to partner with them. And Kairos, the CEO of Kairos, specifically said that he was troubled by this and refused to partner with the police body cam manufacturer, stating that, and this is a direct quote, "Using commercial facial recognition in law enforcement is irresponsible and dangerous." And we can see part of why that is when we look at Amazon's face recognition software, Rekognition. They rolled this out in 2016 in a limited way. They've been working on it continually since then. In 2018, the ACLU did this test. They took photographs, the official photographs of all members of the US Congress, and they put them through Amazon's Rekognition algorithm. And Rekognition falsely identified 28 of those elected members of Congress as known criminals. And these are them. And it's a diverse group. If you know much about the racial makeup of Congress in general, you can see that this is really disproportionately representative of people of color within that elected body. So this is troubling if it's disproportionately identifying people of color as criminals falsely. Amazon has they've sold licenses to Rekognition. It's a software as service product. They've sold licenses to Homeland Security, to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and to, a variety of US police departments. And just last month, after years of protests against Amazon for this, they announced a one-year moratorium. They said for the next year, we're not going to sell face recognition software to any law enforcement, but it's just for the next year. And this happened last month because of the Black Lives Matter protests. But this has been going on for years, though. A final example: the image analysis algorithms of the kind that are in the webcam that we started with. Those are also being used in self-driving cars, where cars need to be taught how to differentiate a person from a non-person object. And it turns out that the image analysis algorithms being used in autonomous vehicles aren't good at recognizing that Black people are people. And so there have been some studies showing that we can expect autonomous vehicles, unless those algorithms are changed in a very purposeful way, to be more likely to can kill dark-skinned people, only people of color, than color and white. So, the further thing is to ask what we can do. And I'll say something about each of these pretty briefly, and then after that, I told you I'd recommend a couple of books to check out, and then we can move into Q&A. So we're almost done. I hope these examples have been lively enough that this hasn't dragged on, even though I know a half hour, like it's a long time for a talk without much back and forth. So, okay, I'll go through these quickly. So these are 5 things that we can do, and this is from some of my own work in engineering ethics. We can, of course, diversify developer teams, and that's the most common thing that's recommended. But there are problems with this. You know, first of all, of course, you know, just because you're a person of color doesn't mean that you know you're really good at recognizing where there are racial issues, and it doesn't mean that you're good at recognizing race issues for everybody. But also, it's just like it's not your job. Ending racism is not the responsibility, first and foremost, of those who are hurt by it. It's first and foremost the responsibility of those who benefit from it. Because people with white privilege, like they have unearned benefits. We have unearned benefits, and we also, you know, because of that privilege, can take more effective action. When white people talk about like, oh, hey, we need to think about discrimination, that gets listened to more often. And when people of color talk about this, it's like, oh, playing the race card, or it's like, you know, it gets written off more often as just like being self-interested, which of course you should be, especially when we're talking about like not getting hit by cars or anyway. But yeah, diversify developer teams. But this is the job of everybody, and this is most of all the job of white people to think about this better, and to take better action on issues of race and equity in engineering and other places. So secondly, we can conduct diverse and longitudinal diversity impact studies. So just like environmental impact studies, we look at, well, with this product, with this technology, what are the long-term effects that this is going to have on our environment, on different species? We can similarly say like, okay, let's sit down for a minute and just say, how is this going to matter to Black people? How is this going to matter to Latinx users? And sometimes as soon as we say something like that, or like, you know, how is this going to impact women in particular? As soon as we say something like that, if we can, you know, put ourselves in somebody else's shoes just a little bit, you know, things stand out pretty quickly. You say like, oh, wait a minute, you know, that would actually be really bad if I were this kind of person. So yeah, we can do that systematically and purposefully, and that will make a huge difference. And that doesn't put the burden on people of color. That's something like everybody can do. Everybody can think meaningfully about this. Third, we can pay attention to biases in our data sets and our inputs. So a lot of the problem here is that people just start out with a data set and they say, yeah, we'll just put it through the math, and then the math will do the thing. And they don't think like, oh, you know, we need to tell it to think about things in this particular way, because otherwise, whatever biases we have already in our data are just going to get spat out the other end, unchanged, except that they're given this like veneer of respectability because a machine said it instead of a person. So we think, oh, it can't be racist anymore. So we need to pay attention to those biases in our inputs. Fourth, we need to test with diverse user groups. Like I pointed out in some of those examples, like if there were better testing, I feel like a lot of these things would have been caught. There are other ways to catch things. You can catch things earlier. That's better. Less expensive to fix things in the design stage. But yeah, test with diverse user groups and make sure that they know that like you want their experience as diverse users. And then finally, like no matter what, things are going to go wrong. You can't think of every possibility. You can't think of how things are going to impact people, especially when you start thinking intersectionally. You're thinking not just about like, how is this going to affect Black people or how this is going to affect women, but start thinking about like, how is this going to affect Black women in particular, where there may be other different emergent issues. So you have to be ready to be wrong. You have to be ready to, you know, to step in things sometimes, and to apologize and to mean it and to fix it. Because yeah, it's not like if you have a group of people who sit down as a developer team and just think real hard, you can do something that is not going to create racial problems in societies that have racial problems. That's never going to happen. So being able to, again, unlike HP at the beginning, to say like, yeah, that's not okay. And we did that and we're going to fix it. That's really important. So, okay, finally, for further reading, I mentioned these at the beginning. These are a couple of recent books that are dealing with these issues and with similar issues and with the related issues. They're both great books and they're both pretty easy reads. They're not like academic books, although they're written by academics and they have academic values, value, excuse me. They're good, solid research, but they're written so that anybody can pick it up. You don't have to be a specialist in information technology or information ethics or anything like that. So these are both great books. If you're interested in this stuff, this is where I'd send you first. Yeah, so I hope that was interesting. We're at 30 minutes. We're going to move over to question and answer from here. And I know I'm getting that in the chat. I don't know exactly how. This is going to be
reading the questions for you.
Okay. So we'll be, all right, great. Thanks.
So, right now we have one question from Tyson from Chesterfield, Virginia. Tyson wrote, do you think some of the misidentification is because of implicit racism or just problems with the sensors used?
I'm trying to think about like misidentification, because of course that could mean like identifying somebody incorrectly, like in the like did somebody blink kind of example, or that might be like the other examples where like the HP computer or the autonomous vehicle where people just aren't recognized as human at all. So I'll try to say something about both. I mean, part of this is about the sensors for sure, but that doesn't mean that it isn't also implicit bias. So I kind of want to say, well, that's a false dichotomy, because the implicit bias went into how we designed the sensors too. Let me give you an example. In a sort of different realm, this isn't with imaging technology, but Oculus Rift, right? The 3D headset. That 3D virtual reality system, and most of them being produced today, use a neural pathway to produce 3D vision through motion parallax. So the different motion of different digital elements presented to the right and left eye varies at different rates, and that produces what the brain processes as 3D vision for most people most of the time. But that's the dominant neural pathway for generating three-dimensional perception for male brains. It works best for male brains. A more dominant pathway for generation of three-dimensional perception for female brains is called a shape through shading pathway, where you see three-dimensionality through differentiation in light patterns. We're not developing software to produce three-dimensionality through shading, because the way that the market was conceived of was as a male market, and it was based on research in psychology that disproportionately used male subjects and that paid more attention to male subjects too, because the result for women is not that they say, oh, it doesn't look three-dimensional. What happens for women disproportionately, for some men too, for sure, if their brains don't work in as dominant a way in that pathway, is they just feel nauseous. So, so the history of studies has been biased because the women dropped out and the predominantly male researchers were like, well, we still have data, because they weren't thinking like, oh, maybe women are different than men. And maybe that matters. And maybe that means that my study is flawed. They said, no, it's fine. And then that produces the technology. And then the technology gets integrated into the market. And then in the market, the misconception about the market plays into this too. So there's implicit bias there, and thinking about like gamers are men. That's a stereotype that we have, which is incidentally false. The majority of people playing games today, playing video games now, are women. And we reinforce that stereotype through what's called a no true Scotsman logical fallacy, where we say like, oh, but they're not playing real games, because women play disproportionately mobile games, and it's, anyway, that gets into this whole, Gamergator kind of mess over there. So I won't get into all that. But maybe that example helps us to see like implicit bias keeps going further and further. And it's there in the sensors. It's there in how we design the sensors. It's there in the algorithms. It's hard to pick it out. Now, the bottom line though, I can imagine you saying, or at least somebody listening, I can imagine somebody saying, yeah, but isn't it just easier to see white people than black people if you're a car? Because white people are like more reflective because they're lighter skinned. And yeah, that may be. But if we design intentionally to keep that in mind and fix it, we're going to look for other things besides lumens. And we're going to find them. So like lumens, that's the easy solution for finding white people at night. It doesn't work that well with other people. And that means that, maybe that's not the way that we should be developing the technology. Okay, cool. Sorry, super long answer. I'm sorry about that.
That's fine. I think that was a great response. So we have another question from Philippe from Williamsburg, Virginia. And I think this is a really interesting question here. So apart from imaging technologies, in which other developing technologies are there examples of racial or other forms of discrimination?
Right. Oh, thinking about where to start with things, because yeah, there's lots of stuff. That Sophia Noble's book, Algorithms of Oppression, that I had up there. It's a great book, and it's as you might see from the cover image, there's a lot of stuff in there about search technologies, and of course the visual reference on the cover to Google. And yeah, there's all kinds of fascinating stuff going on in search technologies. I'll provide a couple of examples there, and then I'll stop myself so I can say something about another technology. But with search, there's so much going on. One really interesting thing, well, Noble starts out with this discussion of autocomplete and image search, where she talks about what happens if you look up. Well, actually, the story she starts out with, I should just follow her lead and tell the story she wanted to start with. She was looking for activities for her niece, if I remember correctly, and just like looked up something about like activities and Black girls, and got lots of not safe for work results, and was really distressed by the fact that when you search for Black girls, you get explicit results. And so part of that is about like the sexualization of people of color, and the way that like that started her off saying like, well, okay, how are people of color showing up in search results? And then there's this famous viral thing from a few years ago where somebody said, try searching for the phrase 3 Black teenagers. And if you did that in image search, you got like mugshots. Where if you search for 3 white teenagers, you get stock footage of people like laughing and eating salad and stuff. And if you search for like 3 Latina teenagers, you get, and same thing with Asians, you get really sexualized content. So with search, there's lots of interesting stuff going on. There's also, if you do Google searches for undocumented and illegal, in google.com, it'll like, if you search for undocumented, it'll bring you pages that talk about illegal immigrants. But if you search for illegal immigrants, it doesn't bring you pages that talk about undocumented, at least not towards the top. So there's a kind of like, in information science, library and information science, we talk about controlled vocabularies. There's like a controlled vocabulary where Google prefers the term illegal immigrant. And if you talk about undocumented, it's going to push you that way. If you talk about illegal, it doesn't push you towards undocumented. If you search google.mx or google.dr for the Mexican or Dominican Googles, it doesn't do that. They have different politics. So you see in there really quickly that even something like search is political, and it's full of political choices, and it's full of political impacts. And Google fixes some of them sometimes and leave other ones out other times. They do things with autocorrect so that if you like, or sorry, autocomplete. So if you start with, you know, like Sophia's, the cover of her book, Noble's book, it's Why Are Black Women So? And then it shows you all the things that people have searched. They stifle those results sometimes when they're too racist, but they don't always. And it's interesting where they choose to intervene and where they don't. So, okay, search is huge. There's all kinds of amazing, interesting, weird things going on with search. I don't know where else to point to besides imaging tech. Imaging tech search. Other things that I talk about in my work, just because I know that those are examples I'll be able to remember pretty quickly, so we can move on to the next question. I talk about kitchen countertops and how they're made for women, which makes it hard for men to do their fair share in the home. Same thing with strollers. When my kids were in strollers, I had to learn to walk differently because otherwise my foot would go right on the brakes as I was just walking normally, and I'd like slam into the stroller with my child, and that was no good. So like strollers are made in such a way that they enforce that women's work is done by women, which reinforces these gender expectations. So there's that stuff. A classic example is the Band-Aid, which is made so that it disappears into the flesh of white people, but it doesn't serve that camouflaging function for people with darker skin. The stairways, of course, was in there. I know I'm blanking on further examples because I'm trying to think on the fly too much. But let's, I hope that's useful. Let's move on to another. Sorry to take so long on each.
So it doesn't seem like we have any additional questions.
Oh, okay.
So either you want to elaborate on another topic or, up to you.
Yeah. If people are feeling ready to move on, that's certainly fine. I wish I could come up with another quick couple of examples. Let me just give another quick couple of examples to enforce the intersectionality part of this, because of course this talk was all about race. I've given some examples about gender, which I hope illustrate some of the intersectional concerns here. But I can give you some other examples. Like this one about religion, where calendars, the way that we set up calendars, I was joking in my family about how somehow the public schools always have Easter off, even though it moves around, but somehow it just works out magically that even though they're public schools and not religious schools, somehow Christians always have their holidays free, and nobody else does. And of course, that's a kind of privilege. It's a kind of disadvantage to non-Christian religious practitioners, where the rest of us, we have to out ourselves to engage in religious practice. We have to like share what our faith practices are with our employer in order to get those accommodations and we have to out ourselves as being religious or not religious, where Christians don't have to do any of that because it's set up so that everything's already done for them. But also means that non-Christian practitioners, they become less reliable, they're around the office less often, and so there are like direct performance impacts that are there. So that's one kind of example. I'll give another kind of example about language, which of course is also an intersectional concern. So there was a class action lawsuit, excuse me, I blanked on that word for a moment. There was a class action lawsuit, I think back in the 80s, maybe, it was a long time ago, against the FBI, where Hispanic agents successfully sued the FBI for job discrimination on the basis of their ethnicity. Because what was happening was that the FBI thought, oh, we have all these Hispanic agents now, and it's awesome because so many of them speak Spanish. And that's a great job skill, which it, really legit is, of course. And the FBI, they weren't being racist by thinking about that. They were valuing diversity in a really appropriate and good way. But what ended up happening, because they implemented their policy without thinking about racial impact, they started from this really good place of valuing diversity, and then they said, "Oh, this is great. We can use this." And then, in practice, what that meant was that Hispanic agents were made supporting. They were put in supporting roles to white agents because the white agents had less to offer because they couldn't speak Spanish. So they ended up being put in charge. And then they, of course, got promoted more often because they were the lead agent over and over again. And the Hispanic agents, because they had more to offer and because the FBI recognized that, ended up playing these lesser roles. So that's a really interesting example in a few ways. One is that this issue of intersectionality, but another is that it shows like the point here isn't about people not being consciously racist or bigoted. The point isn't about like that we need to think about people more kindly. The point is that we need to think about race more seriously. We need to think about ethnicity more seriously. We need to think about gender more seriously. We need to think about ability and disability more seriously. We need to think about religious diversity more seriously. We need to think about LGBTQ issues more seriously. We need to think about diversity more seriously in these ways that takes seriously how these things impact people's lives, and that we can build our environment to do a better job of recognizing and like serving the diversity of our users and our public. So yeah, hopefully those last few examples were worth spending another couple of minutes on.
Yeah, I think those are great again. We have one new question that came in from Ella in Franklin, Virginia, asking, are there any examples of discrimination of any kind in voice recognition software?
I love this topic. I've joked about this with people over and over again in different ways. I have Amazon Echo, and I've joked with people over and over again about how white Alexa is, and it was the most striking thing to me was I asked her, Echo, play Jimene Sariñana, and she said, playing Natalie Fourcade, and like those. And they're both Latin American musicians, but those names don't sound anything like each other. And then, like when I get her to say something, she pronounces it in the whitest way. It's hilarious. But okay, there are some great videos of people with Scottish accents trying to talk to personal digital assistants. I highly recommend that you try to look up Scottish people arguing with voice recognition software. It's awesome. And the Scots accent, of course, can be very strong. But it's really funny because they can get Alexa to hear them as soon as they imitate an English person. Because of course it's programmed for British English, not American English, the ones that they're using. So like you can hear that, and hearing it with accents that, like the normative English accent, of course, is one that sounds foreign to us too. So hearing like the foreign accent and the other foreign accent makes it really striking. So that's a really fun example where you can see that. Other forms of bias with digital assistants are also really interesting, where in some countries, Siri is, you can change Siri's voice and gender. But in some countries, Siri is male by default, including the UK, where in the UK, unlike the US, where she's female by default, in the UK, they found that when they made Siri female, it led to more driving accidents because male drivers wouldn't listen to and respect the views of their navigator as well if she were female rather than male. So in the UK, they found out that, like, you know, male drivers are just so sexist that it worked, like you injured fewer people if you made Siri male, which is of course depressing, but also funny. And there are other countries too, but yeah, but the UK is a striking one. And then it's taken a very long time for there to be virtual assistants that speak in African American accents, and there are still only a couple. The other part of that, which of course is the part that you actually asked about, was about recognition. And there I just don't know so much. I assume that people have done work on this, but I haven't happened to have read any on like differences with African American vernacular English, or differences with like Black American speech patterns, or Latinx accents. I haven't seen that research. I assume that it's being done, but I don't know anything about that most in particular. Oh, there was something else, but I don't remember what it was. Okay.
I know my own personal experience. I've had my own battles with Alexa, particularly my Miami accent. We have another question, and this is probably going to be the last question, from Luis from Mexico, asking, could people identification, so this kind of gets to the broader topic of this discussion, be done by measuring corporal heat or other parameters which do not include skin color or facial characteristics?
So yeah, this is a great example of the bias that's built into the sensors. So like the way that this gets kicked back to critics of technology by people who are working in tech is very often you just sort of blame it on the algorithms, like we saw at the beginning, or you blame it on the sensors, and you just say, like, well, that's the technology. Like, the technology is bad at seeing Black people. Like, sorry, you know, you can't argue with facts. And that's how image recognition works. It works with lumens. And like, yeah, this is the kind of response that we should be giving to that. And it's yeah, exactly this. Like, well, okay, but are lumens the only thing that make us human? Like, that's a very like specific white skin centric kind of way of thinking about what sensors you could possibly be using to figure out that somebody is human and not like a mailbox. There are lots of ways that we can differentiate humans and mailboxes. And one of them is skin color. But yeah, so yeah, like if the alternate model was, instead of saying we're going to use image recognition software using lumens, if we say we're going to use heat images and run image recognition software on that, I think that's going to fix a lot of these problems. Obviously, that's not going to fit with all these cases, but with the autonomous vehicle, like that strikes me as the right kind of thing to do for sure. So that's awesome. Yeah.
thank you very much. This has been a phenomenal lecture. I'm not an engineer, I'm a psychologist, but I study issues of race and racism and the experiences it has on individuals. And as a non-engineer, I think this is very insightful. And I think it really does talk about the importance of people really trying to think about how technology and engineering problems may impact people from across different backgrounds and identities. So thank you very much. For those of you participating, or for those of you who are listening to this video later on after it's posted on the REYES website, I'm sure that if you have any questions, Dr. Whitaker would be more than happy to respond to them. And we will be making his PowerPoints, which will have the links to both these textbooks as well as some of the videos available on our REYES website. So, thank you again.